Now, Madam Zoής Kωνσταντοπούλου from Greece will be followed by Patrick, Speaker of the National Assembly, Zambia. He will take the speaker seat. Yes, Madam Zoής.
Ladies and gentlemen, speakers of the world's parliaments, at this occasion of the 70th anniversary of the UN, also marking the 70 years from the end of the World War II, at this fourth World Conference of the Interparliamentary Union on placing democracy at the service of peace, sustainable development, and building the world that people want, I stand before you and among you as President of the recently dissolved Hellenic Parliament to address you with a call for solidarity to the Greek people and to Greece, the place where democracy was born and where it is now being bluntly attacked and violated. Greece and its people have been victimized during the last 5 years by policies purported to provide a sustainable solution to the country's over-indebtment and a way out of the economic crisis. These policies, contained in agreements called Memoranda of Understanding and concluded by the Greek governments and a trio of international institutions, namely the IMF, the European Commission, and the European Central Bank, known as the Troika, and acting as Greece's creditors, have resulted to severe violations of human rights, especially social rights, fundamental freedoms, and the very rule of law. What has been presented as bailout loan agreements has resulted to misery, unemployment at unprecedented rates, 72% among young women and 60% among young men, hundreds of thousands of young people emigrating, an explosion of suicides, the marginalization of the young, the old, the weak, the poor, the immigrants, the refugees, half of the country's children living under the poverty line, a situation amounting to a humanitarian crisis and documented in the UN Independent Experts on Debt and Human Rights reports and public statements, as well as in a series of court decisions and findings. On the 25th of January 2015, only 7 months ago, the Greek people, through general elections, gave a clear and unequivocal mandate to government and to parliament to do away with these homicidal policies. Negotiations started, a special committee of the parliament was formed called the Truth Committee on Public Debt to conduct an audit and a legal assessment of the Greek debt, through which it concluded a preliminary report last June. The report found that the state's sovereign debt is illegal, illegitimate, odious, and unsustainable. It found that the sovereign debt has been concluded through procedures which grossly violate constitutional law, parliamentary procedure, and fundamental human rights and freedoms guaranteed under international law, thereby justifying the denunciation of the debt. It found that creditors had been acting in bad faith, knowingly burdening the country with unsustainable loans to save French, German, and Greek private banks. Despite these findings, Greece's creditors insisted that the people's mandate be neglected. On June 25th, a 48-hour ultimatum was addressed to the Greek government, asking it to accept, contrary to popular mandate, a series of measures dismantling labor law, abolishing social security guarantees and legal protection for over-indebted citizens, while at the same time requiring the sellout of the most precious public assets and public enterprises, but also major ports, airports, and public infrastructure, all to be sold or given away to repay an unsustainable and odious debt. The Hellenic Parliament accepted the government's proposal to hold a referendum on the ultimatum, and the Greek people, through a large majority of 62%, rejected the measures. During the referendum week, international and foreign government officials tried to influence its outcome through statements terrorizing the people, and the referendum was held with the banks closed and capital controls imposed as a result for the ECB's refusal to provide liquidity after the proclamation of the referendum. And yet, democracy prevailed. The people pronounced themselves clearly and said a 62% no to those homicidal measures. What followed is a nightmare for every democratic conscience and a disgrace. The creditors refused to consider the referendum outcome. They insisted, under the threat of provoking a bank failure and a humanitarian disaster, that measures harsher than those rejected be adopted. The government was forced to accept that Parliament legislates on pre-formulated texts of hundreds of pages with no deliberation and at prefixed dates with an emergency procedure and with the bank still closed. This extortion was baptized prerequisites for an agreement, and Parliament was called to abolish laws it had only voted during the previous 4 months and to refrain from any legislative initiative without prior approval by the creditors. An over 100-page law construed in one article was passed on July 15th in less than 24 hours. A 1,000-page law construed in 3 articles was passed on July 22nd in less than 24 hours. An almost 400-page law was passed on August 14 in 24 hours. Parliament legislated 3 times under duress and coercion. And after this was done, attesting that a large part of the deputies of the major governing party, including the Parliament's president, refused to vote such legislation, Parliament was inadvertently dissolved to ensure a more stable majority to implement what the people have rejected. Ladies and gentlemen, sovereign debt is being used against the Greek population and the Hellenic Parliament to reduce democracy. But democracy is an ultimate value, and parliaments cannot be reduced to stamps approving dictated norms rejected by the people and construed to destroy societies and the next generations. I call upon you, as parliamentarians of the world, to support the claim for democracy and parliamentary sovereignty against debt coercion, and to support the initiatives of the UN General Assembly and the Ad Hoc Committee on Sovereign Debt, as well as the initiatives of the independent expert of the UN on debt and human rights. Do not allow for democracy to be annihilated at the place where it was born. Do not allow that any other parliament be coerced to vote against the people's will and against its deputies' mandate. Do not allow that human rights, human lives, human dignity, and the most valuable UN principles are crushed to serve the banking system. The world that people want cannot be built without the world's people. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Zoe.